This is HTML5, Flash, and the battle for faster cat videos. So just sort of a little bit about who I am. Where we go. So sorry, these slides are from Fluent, where I actually was giving it with another guy. But I'm Greg. That's sort of a good sort of picture of me right there. And I call myself the web warrior. And what that means basically is I spend most of my time working in HTML5 technologies at YouTube. Specifically, I focus on our HTML5 video player. And like I said, normally Phil sort of gives this talk with me, and he's one of our Flash engineers. But I'm kind of glad he's not here, because now I can he won't be able to defend himself when I make fun of Flash. But anyway, so like I said, this is all about HTML5. And I'm sure that many of you are pretty knowledgeable, know what it's all about. But if anybody doesn't, I like to think of it as just like it's just HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and we've added a whole bunch of awesomeness to it. And so what does that sort of entail? Like, what kind of features are new? And so these are the main sort of ones that are highlighted. If you know, online we've got all sorts of cool things, and at YouTube we actually use quite a number of these to all around the site. So you know, we use graphics, CSS3 styling, offline and storage stuff. We use the performance integration features, but you know, this is a media site, so clearly the one that I'm going to talk about the most is the multimedia one. And the slides, you know, usually animate a little bit, but because they're just doing snapshots, it doesn't pop out as much as normal, but that's okay. Anyway, so anyone who's like maybe in sales or translation, if you didn't get it, HTML5 is equivalent to unicorns and rainbows. But Flash, you know, Flash has been around for a really long time. It's sort of a very experienced player in the media world, and at the moment, most of our users have Flash. So, you know, the question is, like, we've had this great Flash player for such a long time that's worked really well. You know, why do we need an HTML5 player? Why did we decide to build one? And so we'll sort of compare the two technologies. We'll look at a bunch of different things: feature, accessibility, a word I made up called deviceability, and I'll get into all these things later. So the first thing I want to talk about is features, sort of like a side-by-side comparison. So, you know, why Flash? Well, let's talk about what HTML5 is missing. Where does Flash sort of excel? And we kind of got a lot of different things. So the first thing is, you know, content protection. We don't own all of our streams, and we need to make sure that they're secure. And Flash has RTMP protocol, and they have Flash access, and this is great. But we don't have this capability in HTML5 yet. Now, this is something that is actively being worked on, and I hope that by the next time I give this talk, I won't be able to include that bullet point. But they're not quite. They haven't finalized the spec yet, and of course, it'll take a long time before that API rolls out to all the browser vendors. And the same thing with with camera and microphone access. We have you know, a lot of users, and some really great ones of just people sort of sitting at their computer talking to the camera inside, and we can do this really easily with Flash, but HTML5 it's not yet available everywhere. But once again, that's another thing that is being worked on, and hopefully again it'll be available soon. And another really cool thing is adaptive and live streaming. So you know, if my connection's slow, it'll downgrade the quality so the playback is smooth. If my connection is fast, it'll make sure that I have the best quality available. And once again, this is something that's being worked on but not quite available. And the same thing with live streaming. Although for live streaming in HTML5, we actually do have some technologies available. We can actually live stream on Safari. And so this actually is great because we've been able to demo doing live streams on like iPads recently. So that's pretty cool. And then full screen video, you know, you really want to make sure that your cats are in HD, hardware accelerated, as big as you can get them, And this is actually probably the most finalized of these details. There's an API that's available in WebKit and Greco, and it's been available for some time. And actually, Opera just released a version in Opera Next. So I think that we should see this one sort of getting finalized pretty soon. But so this is great, and here's a little code snippet just so you know how to do it. It's very simple. You get the element that you want to select, and then you can basically set up you can listen to full screen changes. And when you call webkit.request full screen or moz.request full screen or o.request full screen, you'll get the browser will go into full screen, and you'll be able to watch your cat videos in the best sort of possible viewing experience as one could get. So then the other big things that HTML5 is missing is sort of consistent format support. With Flash, it's really easy. We serve H.264 to pretty much everyone. But HTML5, it's sort of, the world is split a little bit. So we need to support both H.264 and WebM. So IE and Safari do H.264, Firefox and Opera do WebM, and Chrome does both for the moment. Although they've announced that they'll be removing H.264 support, but I don't know what the timeline for that is. So this makes it really difficult for us because we have to make sure that we have all of our videos encoded in both formats, and that we can serve both of these formats to all of our users. And with such a large database of videos, it took us a really long time to make sure that all videos had both available formats for HTML5. The other thing that's great about Flash, and it sort of goes on the consistent format thing, is just having sort of cross-platform consistency. If any of you guys are web developers in the audience, I'm sure you know that it's that there are so many different cross-browser bugs, and with Flash, most of those go away, and so that's great. You wrote it once for Flash, and it worked everywhere. So why, what is HTML5? What do we expect to get from it? Well, it's open source, which is great. We have open source browsers, players, codecs. This should hopefully move things a lot faster, and should result in some great technologies that come out. Also, because we don't have this extra plugin to instantiate, we should see that it's faster. Lower latency, and we'll be able to watch our cat videos as fast as we can. And because it's more integrated in the browser, this should give us better performance and fidelity. And another thing is like power consumption. Now on a desktop, it doesn't really matter too much, but on mobile, that's really important. So I have a little screenshot here. The video itself isn't that important, but this is a picture of one of our data centers. And basically, you have a cat, and he powers it by running in this wheel. Well, of course, it's just a little joke, but I would like to think that all of our data centers are powered by cats. So basically, I have some power consumption on H.264 versus WebM, and this research was done by this great guy, Yossi Oren, who's a PhD student in Tel Aviv. And he took a tablet device that had a WebM chip in it to do these comparisons. So most of our phones that are in the market today do not have WebM chips available to do hardware decoding, but there are a couple that have come about, and we'll see them more and more, especially with Chrome OS machines. And so the things that I want to point out here are pretty much that Flash consumes a lot of power, and for WebM and H.264, the hardware acceleration is always better. And so this is great. So if we want to watch a video on mobile, it just makes complete sense for us to do HTML5, especially if it's hardware accelerated. So another thing that's really important is accessibility. So we have a lot of people who can't use a mouse or are blind, and because it's natively tied into the browser, it's just we get a lot of automatic wins. And so So one thing I want to talk about is captions, and everybody loves, putting captions on their cats, of course. And so this is from XKCD. Oh, hi, I'm here from the internet. What are you doing? Doing captions to your cats. So I'm going to get a screen share up to show you the difference between the two at the moment. Let's see, launching screen share. So I just loaded up a video for YouTube captions and subtitles, and this happens to be the Flash player. And what you can see is my cursor's at the top in the search bar, and if I start tabbing around, I'm on like the search button, and let's see, I'm just above the video now, and then when I tab, I'm actually right below the video. So at the moment I'm at where it says 111 videos, and I tab again, and now I'm at this little insight button at the bottom here. And I can't get into the Flash player. I can't interact with it with my keyboard, which kind of sucks. But if I click on it with my mouse and the video starts playing, then I can actually tab around and interact with the controls. And it actually allows me to escape the video because of some of the things that we've changed. But I can't actually get back inside of it now. And so that's kind of weird and kind of clunky. But if I switch to HTML5, and it's right here, you can see that I'm in the search box at the moment. And I tab around, and now I'm actually already in the player. I can start playing it. And you can see, captions are working too. If I hit my spacebar again, the video will pause. And I can navigate within the player and continue on to the rest of the page. Now I'm navigating the buttons above the player, and I'm navigating them below. And if I go back, I can easily get back to the player with just using my keyboard and start playing things again. And this is really great. And this didn't take any extra effort from us because it's just normal DOM elements. It was very easy for us to get this working. For Flash, on the other hand, it actually took a lot of work to navigate in and out, and it doesn't work everywhere. And you saw from the example, like I was able to use my keyboard to get out of the Flash player, but I wasn't able to get in. And on some browsers, we've been able to get it so that you can go in and out, but it was a lot of extra work and a lot of extra code to get that happening. So now back to the slides. Please, if you guys have 3D glasses, put them on. Now's the time. I got mine with me. No, that's just a little joke, a little cat video thing. But it's a feature on YouTube that we love. It's like being able to watch 3D videos, and this actually works really great in Flash. Flash is sort of built for graphics. It has tools to be able to manipulate the video each pixel very easily. And with HTML5, it just sort of requires a lot of extra work. We have to bring in other technologies, either WebGL or Canvas, and it just doesn't work as smoothly and run as smoothly. But there are standards that are being created, and we have actually HTML5 video with 3D. And you can see our selections on the right side there. We have a lot of different options for Flash. That would be the different colored glasses and the 2 modes for 3D TVs and monitors. And the last one is HTML5. And this is being done with NVIDIA and Firefox. And it's a really cool experience. It works really well. And I hope that more browsers will adopt this, and we'll get the ability to watch 3D more easily in HTML5. So that should be exciting. But at the moment, Flash is kind of built a little bit better for doing that manipulation. So the next thing I want to talk about is something called deviceability. And what I mean by this is where do these technologies exist? Where can you use them? HTML5 versus Flash. And so the first thing we want to look at is are HTML5 capable browsers, and this is sort of a pie slice that's what we see on YouTube. And at the moment, the ratio is actually pretty good. So almost over 80% of our users can actually use HTML5, have the ability to do just a video tag. Now, of course, in order to get an excellent video watching experience, we also recommend that the user has the ability to do that full screen API that I talked about and some of the other features that have come up. And so it's we don't serve it to 80% of our users, but a lot of them do at this point have the ability to do just pure HTML5 video. So this is great. Now, but the world sort of looks like this a little bit in all of those places. And this is an exaggerated slide, and I created this when I actually first gave the talk. Because when I first gave the talk, it was only 35% of our users that could use HTML5 video. But basically, the world looks like all these places that can have Flash, a good chunk that can have HTML5 as well, and a tiny little sliver that will only have HTML5 capabilities. And this is mostly iPhones and iPods and iPads, but other things like TVs are included in there as well that don't have Flash support but can do HTML5. But one of the interesting things that happened was when I looked at where our APIs were being used, where people were trying to build interesting applications that use YouTube, it sort of shifted, and it was more like this. It was a lot of places, a lot of this mobile world was trying to use HTML5 video, only had HTML5 video, and they wanted to build interesting YouTube applications. And we have Android that sort of spans half of that, although with the newer versions of Android, we don't have Flash available either. So when I saw this, and I saw that there was really such a drive for people to want HTML5, wanted to bring YouTube to places that don't have Flash and needed HTML5, the question really wasn't about why HTML5. It was really more about when. When do we serve it up? When do we give it to our users? So the first thing that we wanted to do was just recover playbacks that would have been lost without Flash. So a user comes to our site, they don't have Flash installed, we want to give them HTML5. And so that was sort of the first thing. And our solution to this was pretty simple. It was an iframe embed just like this. And basically what this does is it's a simple little code snippet that people can put on their site, and we can give them HTML5 or Flash. And one thing I want to point out here is the part that says allow full screen. And remember I talked about that full screen API earlier. Well, our embeds, when they go out into the wild, they live there for a really long time. And the iframe embed has been out for almost 2 years now. It's been our default embedding experience for about over a year and a half. And today, we still see about equal numbers of our iframe embed compared with our old style of object embeds. So the object embed, which has been around for many, many years, it's going to stay around. So basically, what this code does, what allow full screen does, is when that full screen API is finalized, that will allow us to get full screen support through that JavaScript API inside of an iframe. It doesn't do anything today because it needs to be vendor prefixed for all the different browsers. But once that's done, we'll get full screen, and it'll work on all of our iframes that we've released into the wild. So remember, when you're doing things like that, when you're releasing content that's going to go on other people's sites, whether it's an embed like this or some JavaScript or something, you really want to make sure that you plan for the future because it's going to live for a long time, and you want to make sure that you can do all your cases. Now, at the same time, it's a risk. That full screen API might change. It's not finalized yet. So you don't want to, you have to sort of balance the risk of loading things that are gonna be useless with making sure that you do plan for the future and can have that full richness when those things get finalized. So what does this iframe embed give us? Well, like I said, we're able to serve HTML5 or Flash based on the device and the user's preferences, and this is most important sort of in mobile. So we get just a really deeper reach into being able to deliver a good video experience on mobile. And it's just this just works experience. It's really easy to copy and paste. There's not, the code is very short, and it's just going to work whatever environment that you're in. So now there are a lot of different ways to embed content, and so you might be, wondering why did we use an iframe when, script tags and object tags, script tags are what a lot of people use, and object tags are what we've used in the past. So with the script tag, the problems is YouTube is not just a video tag. There's a whole lot more that goes on. For example, the controls, features like captions and annotations, and our end screen. And we need to be able to preserve our personal brand and have all these extra elements that provide this richness to your video watching experience. So we needed our stuff sandbox, and a script tag doesn't allow us to do that. We didn't want the ability for our users to have their CSS interact with our stuff by accident. So that really wasn't an option for us. And object tags are great, and we've used those for the Flash Player for a long time, and you can load in an HTML page with just using the data attribute, and you can interact with it with your mouse, and that's great. But the problem is we have a rich API and a JavaScript API, and we still wanted people to be able to use that to build interesting applications. And with an object tag, there's no way to sort of get that communication across. So an object tag wasn't going to work for us, and which is why we went with an iframe. And I'll talk about that API communication later. So you might be wondering, how does a user get HTML5? How do we decide this? And so this is sort of just a graph. And the first thing that you have to do is opt into our HTML5 experience. And we're definitely trying to make it as the default experience, but I'll get into why it's sort of taken a long time for us to do that later. So I'm just going to pull up the screen share again. If you go to www.youtube.com/html5, let me raise that just a little bit so you can see the address bar. You'll get a page like this, and it's very simple. You come, and we even show you that if your browser supports the video tag, if it supports H.264 and WebM, and you can click to join the trial, and then you'll be defaulted into the experience. So back to the slides. So the first thing that we do with our iframes is we're going to go, all right, does your browser support HTML5? And that's pretty simple code. So basically what we do, we create a video element, and we look to see if that video element has the CanPlay type API on it. Because you can certainly create any element you want, and they'll exist, but it won't necessarily be the rich HTML5 video tag. So we look for CanPlay type, and then we look to see if the browser that we're in, the client that we're in, can support either WebM or H.264, the two formats that we support at YouTube. And if that's all fine, if it'll support either format, sweet, we can sort of attempt to do HTML5. Now, the interesting thing is, why do I ask if we can do either or? Like, we don't actually have our formats at this time. And so if we look back at the graph, there's the part in the top right. We actually wait for the user to click play before we gather all this information. And this is because most of our embeds don't get clicked on, and we don't want to put all this extra stress on our servers and on our databases, because our embeds do get viewed billions of times a day, but they don't get played necessarily all that many times. I think I don't remember what the numbers are, but it's certainly it might only be like a billion views as opposed to like multiple billions of views with the impressions. So we want to wait until the user actually clicks and we know that they want to play before we fetch all this data. And so once we do, then we look, all right, are there any sort of business reasons we can't play? Maybe the video is private, and so, well, if that's the case, we're going to, but if it's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. We'll keep going down. And then we look to see, are any of the formats that were delivered, do we have H.264, do we have WebM, and can the platform that we're on support either of these? Now, at YouTube, we do mostly prefer WebM. It's a great format that I support a lot. But on mobile, we do make other decisions because most of these mobile devices don't have hardware chips, like I discussed before. We're going to prefer H.264 in those cases. And if that's all good, winning, we can play our HTML5 video. Otherwise, we're going to fall back and try to do the Flash player and see if the Flash player can play in those cases. And similar logic works on our main YouTube.com page, not our embeds as well. So if you come to YouTube.com, you don't have Flash installed, it'll basically go through the same sort of logic, except the data will already be there at the impression to decide if it can do HTML5 or if it needs to fall back to Flash if you've opted in, or just has to sort of fail if it can't. So the next thing that I want to talk about, and I think one of the more sort of interesting and most important things, is performance. And this, like I said, this talk, it's the battle for faster cat videos, and this cat right here, he's really ready for a battle. So one of the first things we look at is something called player start time, and this is the time just for the first bit of player code to run. We have a separate JavaScript file that deals with the HTML5 player, and this we basically mark this time when the constructor for our player runs. And in Flash, it's really the first bit of Flash code that runs. This is great because HTML5 is a lot faster. It's about half a second faster, and this is actually up from over a year ago from only being 200 milliseconds faster. The browsers have been improving very quickly. And certainly our code has been improving as well to make sure that things run as fast as possible. And so this is great. Big win for HTML5. It's working faster. And I have a demo that I'll show later that'll really sort of show how much faster it can be. And because this is really the time until it looks like the player's there. It's one of the first sort of visual cues that you have a player is going to be very similar to player start time. The next thing that we look at is the time until we actually get this video. And so in HTML5, this is equivalent to load start. So when you actually just want to grab the video, and there's some non-trivial amount of work that needs to be done. We have to make sure that we grab the right format, whether it's WebM or H.264. We want to make sure that we have the right quality for the user's screen size and all that. So there's some non-trivial amount of work that needs to be done. And when we did all this work, we actually saw some pretty surprising things. If you look at just HTML5, just sort of across the browsers, we saw that Opera was actually really awesome. They were 200 milliseconds ahead of the pack. It was all very, very close, but they sort of stood out as an outlier. And in Flash, it was kind of the same, except we also had IE. And so IE 9 specifically and Opera were really the leaders, being about 300 milliseconds faster than everyone else. And with these comparisons, I always use IE9 because the older versions of IE don't have HTML5 support. So to make it a more fair comparison, it's just looking at IE9. Although once IE10 comes out, we'll sort of move to doing IE10 and IE9. And then if we compare HTML5 and Flash directly, HTML5 is almost always faster. It's usually around 300 to 400 milliseconds faster, but IE9 is actually exception. And IE9 with Flash is actually slightly faster than HTML5, which was surprising. But that just happens to do with how it's integrated, and I'm not quite sure all the in-depth details, but it was very surprising to see that it was faster in that situation. But the metric that's actually the most important is when the video actually starts playing. And so here's the graph that we have, and this is actually a really sad graph for me, because if you see, the HTML5 and Flash have actually swapped. HTML5 is actually a slower experience for YouTube at the moment, and it's about 2.5 seconds slower. And this is, of course, looking at it across the entire across the world of all of our playbacks. When we look at this metric in like the Bay Area, for example, that's where I am. The gap is much smaller, but across the entire world, with different things being with our caching infrastructure being different, and the policy of whether or not a video can play in HTML5 or play in Flash with like the U.S. and as opposed to international changes. And actually, one thing that's really neat is Firefox is actually the closest to catching Flash, and they're only about a second slower. And actually, I looked at this number a little bit more recently from when I wrote the slide, and it's even better. It's closer to half a second now, which is great. These things are moving in the right direction. They're catching up on Flash, and I think pretty soon we'll be able to see HTML5 be the better experience as far as performance goes. So now, why is Flash so fast? What have we done, over the past years to really make the Flash experience as fast as we can on YouTube? And certainly these techniques that I'll talk about do apply to HTML5 as well. So the first thing we do is we make assumptions. Most of our users are going to have the most recent version of Flash. So what we do is we can optimistically embed the most common case and do version checking. Originally, what we used to do is we used to check to see, like, okay, do they have this version of Flash? Do they have an older version of Flash? If they have an older version, we need to give them our ActionScript 2 version. If they have a newer version, we'll give them our ActionScript 3. But because most of the people have the best version, we're just going to assume that, and then we'll fall back and we'll update and we'll give them the older version. And when we did this, we saw a 250 millisecond improvement to our Flash start time. So that's the very first measurement that I talked about. And this is great. This is a huge improvement, across the entire world. So we make assumptions, and because most of our users are going to have these. Going to have up-to-date systems, at least for Flash. The next thing we do is we preload our video connection. So one of the very first things that happens on the page, at the very, very top, we have a little snippet of code like this. And all we do is we know what the video connection is going to be. Once again, we sort of assume what quality they want to watch. And just in an image tag, we're going to set the source to this video connection URL. And what this does is, like, right away, we're going to resolve our DNS while the page is rendering. It's going to maintain that open connection. And we saw a 200 millisecond improvement when we did this. So this is great. We just made sure that our connection sort of happened as fast as we could, as early as we could with the page being rendered. Now, what about embeds? Because the things I talked about, we can't really make those assumptions as much. We don't have the, I said that most of our embeds don't get played, and we don't have the video format, so we can't necessarily, preload the video connection either. So the first thing is we really want to cache things. That's super important to make sure that the speed is as fast as possible. So we used to have our object embeds like what you see at the top, and we would have the /v URL with the video ID. And this was a very simple URL that people would copy. We do a 302 redirect that would bring us to a little lightweight loader Swift that would then load sort of a version of our Flash player. And so it was sort of this three-step process, and that kind of sucked. So what we were able to do is we were able to sort of decrease the number of requests. And so the only number 3 was really cacheable in that example. And so what was better was for that initial request to be that Flash application that would load things, and then number 2 would be completely cacheable, and that was really good. But sort of the best example, and this is what we do with our for embed, is we have youtube.com/embed, and this is just text HTML, so it's really, really lightweight. It's really, really small. And then we can load in this versioned and cacheable version of our Flash player. And we can do, of course, the same things with HTML5, load in a version of our HTML5 player that's versioned and cacheable as well. And certainly all of our JavaScript, CSS is like that. The other thing is we can sort of lazy load. We don't need all these resources right away. We want to make sure that people see that it's embed. And because, like I said earlier, most of our embeds never get played. So do we really need to load the Flash player just to see a thumbnail, or load the full HTML5 player just to see that it's a video player, that it's a YouTube video player? So I have here just sort of a snapshot. This is the Flash player on the left and the HTML5 player on the right. No, I'm lying. I actually just copied the image because it was fine. But the players do look very similar, and they do, they're if ever they're not identical, it's because we released a feature or a new design in one player and we haven't gotten to it in the other player right away. But they do look very similar. They'll stay together and they'll look the same. So it doesn't really matter. You don't need to load the Flash right away because you can just have an HTML version. So I'm going to show you a quick demo now of our iframe player. So back to the screen share. So it should be good. Here we go. Actually, I need to make this screen share a little bit bigger. So I'm just sort of resizing the thing, and there we go. So I have this little demo. It's gregthebusker.com/iframedemo.html. And I have 3 players here. Now, the one on the top left, this is the Flash player. The one on the top right is the HTML5 player. You can see that they look very similar, with just some slight differences. And the one down here is sort of an extra super lightweight version that doesn't actually have a video player loaded. So now if I refresh the page, I hope that you guys will be able to see which players load first. So I'll refresh it once. And if you can see, I'm not quite sure what the frame weight is for the screen share, but this bottom player here loads the fastest. It snaps in right away. And the HTML5 player is really quick too, but there's actually a significant time where you can see that the Flash player is taking longer. So now I'm going to do a force refresh again, make sure that it requests all the things and that they're not cached. And we can see the same thing. The bottom player loads really, really fast. The one on the top right loads almost as fast, and the Flash player takes longer. So this is a great win for HTML5, and a great win for just being able to lazy load things. Now, the thing that I'm always worried about is when I actually click play. So I'm going to play these 2 videos at the same time, and I'm going to hope that the HTML5 player plays faster because, of course, that's the one that I work on, the one that I sort of am proud about. But we'll see what happens. So I click play.
Hi everyone. My name is...
And that was great. This time, the HTML5 player won. It was great. When I do this talk in international locations, it's much less likely that the HTML5 player will win. Another cool thing that we can do is I can seek to, because it's the HTML5 spec, I can seek to 1 minute, and often the HTML5 player will actually seek to exactly the time that I tell it to, but the Flash player usually has to go to a keyframe. And now this is something that they're actually working on improving, and I can see that it did get to 1 second, so they are experimenting with things, and it's perfect, but for a while, that took a lot of extra work to make sure that they could seek to an actual second and not a keyframe. So let me load a new video, see if this one will play first in HTML5 or Flash. And I actually don't know which one won. They started off at about the same time. Let me see if I can. So it looks like the HTML5 player won as well, but they were very, very close. So this is great. Great news. HTML5 is winning. Hoorah, rah. I don't have the Flash guys here to make fun of me for it. So now I'm going to hop back to the slides. Oops. Let me get back to, right. So the next thing I want to talk about is our player APIs. I talked about our iframe embed and having to build this rich experience so people could interact. And with an iframe, we had to make some changes. We had this way of doing this communication with our object embeds with the Flash player. Now that we're in an iframe, we don't have the same communication. We had to sort of figure something new out. So the most important thing about it is communication. How do we communicate with the iframe? Well, one common technique is to just sort of pull for the URL fragment. So you can have your iframe like this, youtube.com/embed, the video ID, and then you have the fragment at the end, and that can change without refreshing the page. But your messages are very one-dimensional. They have to be strings, and because you're pulling, you're going to be eating up your CPU. It's not going to be super instant. And the biggest issue and the most complicated part of it was you had to have both directions of communication use the same fragment. So if your embedded video player communicating with the parent frame and the parent frame communicating with the iframe made it very difficult to make sure that you weren't overriding messages that you were sending to one another. So this really wasn't a good thing for us to do. But instead, we have this API called post message. And it's pretty simple. It's just you have a window, and you can call post message, and you send a message with a target origin where you're sending this message to. And so basically what this allowed us to do is we could use JSON for native encoding and decoding of our data. It made it very simple. Just the message is a string, although this API is changing slightly so that you can actually send objects as well. And we didn't have to pull anymore. We could use the native event listeners that were so natural for us to use in the rest of our code to do this communication between the two things. Now, communication is also sandboxed per window, so we didn't have to worry about overriding things. But if we have multiple videos embedded on a page, we do have to worry that they're all sending messages to the same parent container. So, but this is very simple. You basically give each player an ID, and then they just use that sort of handshake so that when I send a message, it knows who it's coming from, and it knows this sort of ID. And then the calls are asynchronous, and this actually causes some problems because if you're calling something like get current time, you don't want that to be asynchronous. You want that to be there right away. And this also, we wanted to mimic our Flash, our object embed API as close as we could. So we wanted to make sure that even though it was asynchronous, that it still felt synchronous. But this is pretty simple. Basically, we just sort of update when things change inside the player. We'll post events out, and we have a little wrapper, a little JavaScript sort of wrapper that you interact with that'll take care of storing all this data about the video player. And so that way, when you call get current time or get video quality and stuff, it'll feel like it's asynchronous. And it will be a little bit out of date, but it'll be, for the HTML5 player, it's as out of date as it takes for on-video progress to fire and then do a post message to the parent. And for the Flash player, it's around like a 250 millisecond delay, which isn't very much and shouldn't be too much of a problem. So sort of like the conclusion of this is at YouTube, Flash is still preferred in most places because it has more critical features and it has a deeper reach with the features that we feel like are required for HTML5 to be a great video experience. But like I said, HTML5 is pretty awesome, and it's improving every day. These new APIs are coming out, allowing us to take chunks out of Flash's sort of critical feature set. And it's really important for having a greater mobile reach, and people really want it. And so with that, thank you guys for listening, and I'll take some questions. So I'm just going to pull up the Q&A thing, I guess. Here we go. So let's see. So how do you suggest we design for the future when video will be played on mobile devices, television monitors, Apple TV, etc.? I think HTML5 is great for this because HTML5 isn't going anywhere. It's being used in all these different places, and it's great because the code that I use to play video works everywhere that has sort of a browser to render it. And so this works really great on mobile. This works on television, and things like the PS3, with like WebKit being imported, things like this works great. Now the tricky thing is, of course, technology does change. It's hard to plan for the future. Definitely, you have to worry about touch much more often, and we're seeing a lot of bugs, but in like mobile spaces with like, okay, is the video tag working properly? And I'm trying to be an active participant in some of the spec discussions about HTML5 video to make sure that they have mobile in mind, and so that things are documented so that when you're writing an application that if it's on a mobile device, how it's going to react, if you're going to be able to do things like autoplay, which isn't always available. So that's really how what I think you should do to sort of design for the future is use HTML5 because it's going to live in all these places. People like Mozilla are really pushing for HTML5 to be even more places. They're pushing it to be sort of like the primary experience on their phones with boot to Gecko. So it's definitely something that's going to be, it's going to work. You're going to write it once and it'll work in all these different places. Granted, as most of you developers know, you'll definitely have cross, browser issues, and you'll have cross-device issues and things like that. But that's much less development time than having to write native apps for all these different platforms. So let's see what the next one is. How does Flash compare with HTML5 when the browser overhead is removed with Adobe Air, for example? So I actually don't know. I haven't looked at Adobe Air. It's not a place that we've really, a development environment that we've really focused on. I can talk about mobile devices a little bit more, but they don't really have Flash. So on mobile, if you're running an app and you can do Flash in an app, the Flash is just a huge overhead there, where HTML5 runs really well. But oddly enough, if you compare like native applications with HTML5 sort of in a web view, in most places, the HTML5 actually runs a little bit slower. And like I was saying with Mozilla, like it's not the case for what they're doing, but for Apple, it's kind of weird, and I'm not quite sure how it's definitely been improving, but I don't know how aggressively they've been trying to push HTML5 as being a more primary development environment on their platforms. So I don't know about Adobe Air, and I'm not really sure. I would imagine that Adobe, because it's an Adobe product, Flash is probably going to work a little bit better, but I'm not sure about all the different situations where you don't have the same sort of browser overhead. So I'm looking at, let's see, another question. Do you suggest we offer formats, Flash, WebM, and then OGG? So I'm not a super, an extremely knowledgeable guy about all the different formats. I definitely think that WebM is great, and OGG is pretty cool, and it works in a lot of places really well. And certainly some of the more recent improvements that they're doing are also very cool. So I sort of, the interesting thing here is you really need to know your users. So at YouTube, we have Flash, HTML5 for HTML5, H264, and WebM, because that's what our user set is. So when you're trying to make these decisions, understand who your users are, who your target audience is. So, if you're designing something that's going to be brand new and you're pretty confident that all your users are going to be on, modern browsers, for example, spending your time developing Flash might not be that big of an effort. But if you're doing something that, is, maybe something that's, you already have a site, and you know that a lot of your users are coming on with IE8, for example, you will need to build Flash. So it's really about understanding your users, and what capabilities the browsers that your users are using have to know which formats to offer. So let's see. Question: Opera HTML5 loading was faster than Google Chrome. Yes. For player start, that was Opera was indeed faster. But these browsers continue to leapfrog each other. So if I did it today, Opera's I think the Opera build is a little bit out of date. So I would expect that Chrome would be faster if I did like today. But when Opera 1250 comes out, which is the Opera Next build, it might leapfrog them again. So a lot of the problems with looking at some of these stats is they change pretty rapidly when a new version of each browser comes out. But the last time that I did these numbers, and Opera was still faster, and I did them right before Fluent, which was in June. So it was still the case that Opera was sort of winning. But like I said, they leapfrog each other all the time, and it's a really competitive sort of space. All right. Do you suggest we still offer video and other formats like OGG as a fallback? Once again, I sort of kind of answered this. It depends on your users. Depends who's coming. Certainly, if you have the capabilities to do that, absolutely. If it doesn't take, if you're not worried about like storing this extra data and the extra development time, like the more formats, the better. Because you'll reach more users, and you'll be able to, with anybody who comes to your site, they'll be able to get a good, rich experience. So if you can, do it. But so like at YouTube, for example, we have so many videos. It's actually quite difficult for us to provide more formats on top of what we already have. Because we do, like I said, it's H.264 and WebM, but on top of that, it's at different qualities. We have 360, 480, 720, 1080, and then there's like the original format. It's all this stuff gets just sort of multiplied by a lot. So it's not something that we really feel is worth it, because most of our users, because we are providing Flash to most of our users, and then HTML5 is for the ones that don't have Flash, who will with our user base, will always have WebM or H.264. Does YouTube support analytics for HTML5 video, like how it is for Flash-based videos? So our analytics stuff at YouTube is going to be the same. We'll count views and how long a person's watching. We do all the stat tracking. It's going to be the same. The idea that we try to do is at YouTube just in general is HTML5 and Flash shouldn't matter to the user. They just want to watch a video, and it should just work. So when you come to our site, if somebody's watching your video, for example, in HTML5 and Flash, all that data gets recorded in the same way. We don't show any statistics if it's being watched in Flash or HTML5 more, but you'll still, those playbacks are going to be counted as views of the video and as time watch. So it's all the same. Now, HTML5 video itself, being able to do analytics on it, like see how smooth the playback is coming, this is something that's still in discussion. There are standards. Both Mozilla and Chrome and IE have different attributes on the video tag that will report like how many drop frames, how many painted frames, and things like that. So you can do sort of analytics like you would in Flash if you wanted to do that on your own site. What about DRM and HTML5 videos? So DRM is content protection. This is something that's being worked on. Like I said, I hope that I can actually say that it's working in a stable browser the next time I give this talk. But I don't know how long it'll take. Chrome is actively working on this. I know Firefox has, I believe, started working on it. I've had many discussions with them, and I hope that this will come soon, but it's not here yet. And this last question, iPhone, iPod, what about Android, which has larger worldwide market share? Is it HTML5 capable? Okay. So I'm pretty sure this question was probably asked right before I had talked about Android. Android at the moment, the most used Android OS is 2.3.3, and that actually does have Flash support on it. But it also has HTML5 with the Android browser. Now, that browser is kind of clunky. It's out of date, and it's not that great of an experience. But with newer Android versions that have Chrome as their main sort of browsing experience, and they have Chrome for in-app sort of rendering as well, those ones do not have Flash available. So that's Android 4 and above, don't have Flash. And that browser experience is actually very good. Now, if you're like me, you might have multiple browsers installed on your phone. So I actually have 4 versions of Firefox, 3 versions of Opera, Opera Mobile and Opera Mini, and then I have the Android browser and the Chrome browser on my phone. And so the experiences are all very different, and it's interesting to see how Firefox actually keeps things up to date. It's identical to the experience on desktop, and it's no more than like a week out of date ever. On Opera, they're a little bit slower to, I feel, update their mobile version, but no more than a month. But also their release process is not as fast as Firefox or Chrome. Chrome, on the other hand, they're trying really hard to make sure that that the mobile version is up to date with the desktop version, but they're not quite there yet. So certainly Android is HTML5 capable. You have HTML5 video support from, I believe it's Android 2.2.1 is when they first had HTML5 video. And it is the HTML5 is definitely the preferred experience at YouTube to do video over Flash, even with the older versions. So, great. So I don't see any more questions here. So I'll just thank you guys for listening, and I hope you enjoyed everything.